Welcome to Passion Powered Patter, a new Mischief mini-series that meets industry experts to explore how brands can connect with passions to form closer relationships with consumers. Given what we've got coming up next year, this first chapter will cover sport. There'll be the Euros, the Olympics, the UEFA Champions League at Wembley, and that's before you even consider regulars like the 100, Wimbledon, Silverstone and the Six Nations. Today we're joined by Jack Peat, founder of the London Economic and the UK floating editor of the hugely popular lifestyle network joe.co.uk. Thanks for being here with us today, Jack.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Let's kick off. Let's hear a bit about you and what you're up to and kind of what your role entails.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of people will certainly have heard of Joe, and a lot of people certainly within sort of like a political sphere will have known of the London Economic. Both sort of speak to similar audiences, and we are of a similar demographic, although we're both in the same media house. Joe speaks to sort of 20 to 30-year-olds, and TLE then speaks to 30 to 50. And my role is to sort of like work across both of those, and certainly sort of like do a bit of there's a firefighting element. You know, if we've got a traffic dip over here, or if algorithms changed over there, then sort of like moving over and just sort of making sure things are smooth on both sides. But it's interesting because they both have very different focuses, but equally it sort of keeps me on my toes, and it's a job that I really enjoy doing.
And we hear you're a massive sports fan yourself. I know you love Doncaster Rovers. I heard you've gone to great lengths to get to the games before. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so on numerous occasions I've actually done absolutely daft things to get to a Doncaster game, which is just ridiculous, really. Yeah, one that actually made the press recently was that I took what was it? I guess it was a tram, 2 flights, a slow commuter train all the way up to Barrow for a Tuesday night game, and it was mainly actually just to sort of highlight how ridiculous it was to get there. Barrow, having been a team that was recently promoted, I've never been to the ground, so I wanted to do it, but the West Coast train fares were just astronomical and just completely unaffordable. And I realised that you could effectively fly via Dublin to Manchester and get there for like something like 35 quid. And the train was £100 and an open return was something like 360 quid. So I just want to sort of demonstrate that. So I flew to Barrow. Which was quite an experience. And when I got there, it had got some media attention. So I was invited into the dressing room to give a pre-match sort of like pep talk. I don't know if you've ever seen the one with the Arsenal, where the Arsenal cameraman gets to address the players.
Yep.
It was like that, but my talk was completely shit. And I was completely frozen on the spot, and I was in this moment where I'm looking at all these players in a very small dressing room, and they're all looking at me sort of like, come on then, you know, you've travelled all this way, cheers up before the game. And I was like, oh, do your best. You know, I just literally didn't know what to say. So,
did it work? Did they win?
No, we lost.
Oh.
Yeah, and deservedly so. On the basis of that speech, we should have been absolutely hammered, but we did lose in the end. But it was worth it to get a point across, and I think I did on that.
Yeah, we're definitely a passionate sports fan then. And so I guess a lot of your readers are also passionate sports fans, and you talked a little bit about kind of algorithm dips and things like that in your intro. Is sport content something that is appealing to your readers? Is that something you get a lot of clicks on? What type of content is it around sport that they're more likely to kind of engage with?
Yeah, so sport content is huge for us in the UK. It's equally huge for us in Ireland for 2 different reasons. So in Ireland, the focus is on rugby and Gaelic sports, and in the UK, I would say that we are predominantly football, definitely some sort of like boxing, but equally it's sort of any sport really. Often the stories that really work for us have a element of sport and are attached to a certain sport, but they're sort of a newsy, viral sport that really do it for us. So it is sport per se, but it's wider than that. And I think, you know, as an editor, I almost feel like a little bit of a fraud when I answer these questions, because we're not editors in the same way that we were editors 30 years ago in Fleet Street days. We are editors in so much as we have some control over the content, but we are almost more like interpreters of algorithms these days. And we are really, really attached to each of the platforms and how they change.
Right.
And that's across every platform. You know, it's not just social media. Google's a massive driver of traffic for us too, and obviously we seem to get a new platform by the day now. So I'm in the office at the moment figuring out how to conquer Threads, you know, and it probably there'll be another one next week.
Yeah. And then we're already getting asked. I mean, obviously next year is a big year for sport. Lots of brands are coming to us already saying, how can I get involved with sport? How can I reach my audience by piggybacking the Olympics, for example?
I think that brands have a really big role to play in a lot of this. Obviously, as you say, next year is a huge year for sport, and it's a little bit like in the politics world. When there's a big year for politics, everybody talks about it, and we will be right behind that. I think that it's really important, and it refers back to the algorithm point, really. You've got to consider as marketers what we're looking for as journalists that will engage with the audience. So really the answer to that is it depends on the platform first and foremost. If we're predominantly looking at social media, then we're looking at the aspects of virality. We're certainly looking at the visual components. That is huge.
Yeah.
But equally, if you think that this is something that's going to be stickier, that's going to have sort of like a long shelf life and probably might be suited more to Google and search engines, then we're looking for depth and insight and research and things like that. And those stories equally work just as well for us.
Makes sense. And then I guess one of the challenges we have as marketeers is brands want to talk about these things much earlier than consumers are ready to read about it. And so how do we get that balance right? Like, when is a good time to contact you, say, for example, to talk about the Olympics? Like, is now too soon? A reader's going to be turned off by that content because they're like, oh, it's not happening till next year. Are we waiting for something to go viral? Does there need to be an element of reactivity in what we do? Like, how should brands approach it?
Unfortunately, there's not like a simple one-line answer to that. It's massively nuanced. First of all, there's a logistics component to some of this. If there's travel involved and if there's things like kit and teams, and we need to sort of like be out there, then that's that. Yeah, certainly having a bit of a heads up about events like that is huge, because we can't overnight arrange a crew of camera people to be at an event in Istanbul, you know, or wherever it is. Equally, like, I think for the sort of, you know, for want of a better term, smash and grab news pieces, having a big lead on that doesn't really appeal to me. I absolutely hate embargoes. Yeah. By the way.
Okay.
I'm a digital journalist, by the way. So that doesn't apply to print. And I can see why people do embargoes, but anything that sort of stalls me saying that's a good story, let's run with it, and it's like, oh, actually, let's run with it at 00:01 this morning. It's like, no. But yeah, so news pieces need to be more immediate, I think, and things that require planning and you think that could work with being bigger with crews and stuff like that, then a bit of a lead time with those. Yeah.
Okay. And then a lot of our brands that we work with are doing official sponsorships, and I guess in that instance there's access to talent, there's tickets, there's all of those kind of additional assets that work quite hard for media. I suppose it gives you an opportunity to get access to different people. If there's brands that don't have official sponsorships, I mean, an example that springs to mind is Paddy Power. They never seem to have an official sponsorship of any sporting events, but they're always kind of front and centre of it and seem to somehow bring the story around to them. Like, what do you, as a media, and when you're writing an article about a brand that's just piggybacking, what's the best way for a brand to go about that without them getting into trouble, but also kind of positioning themselves front and centre of the story?
I know that question is sort of angled at the brands that don't have the sponsorship, but actually I think that the answer that lies in brands like Paddy Power actually is applicable just as much to those that do have the sponsorship, because the answer is create brilliant stories, you know? Even if you have official sponsorships and you can get tickets and you can get access, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't work for the journalist, it doesn't work for your brand unless you can come up with a great story. And I think that what Paddy Power does is, first of all, obviously it allowed itself to be a bit mischievous. I think they even had a head of Mischief at one point. Yeah. For me, that is super cool.
Yeah.
And I work 99% in earned media, in that I'm an editor and I decide what goes onto a page. it's not going on unless the story's brilliant.
And are there any recent brands that you think are really nailing it at the moment, doing it really well at infiltrating sport?
I guess one of the most recent examples that I can think of is we ran a campaign by Just Eat, which was the Queen's Header, where they opened up a pub that exclusively showed women's sport. And from the moment that I saw that headline, I just knew it was a story. It did that brilliant viral thing where people who didn't like it commented, and we were like, thank you so much, keep commenting, and just keep bringing it on, because the more you comment, the more it gets sort of like propelled into other people's feeds. And I've got to say that was a really clever idea, because it was a talker. There's nothing quite like a talker in your industry.
Yeah.
But it equally so, and even more so, when the algorithms operate in such a way that comments are sort of like elevated far more than likes, far more than shares. Facebook has explicitly said, we want to become a platform for people to talk, and it's told us that, and it's told you that, so the more that we can get those talkers and publish them on Facebook, they're an absolute win for us. And that campaign absolutely showed that.
Well, that was a Mischief campaign, so I'm glad you liked it. Promise,
of course,
we didn't pay him to say this.
I'm in handcuffs, yeah. Today, I did a story about Gary Lineker, not to do with this, but what came up was one of the commercials from back in the day, which was him and Gaza in the crowds watching a game, when Gaza burst out into tears, and it's sort of like, it was a play on when he burst into tears. And, and you think about Gareth Southgate's working for Pizza Hut and stuff like that. They're iconic branded moments in sport that had very little to do with the game itself. And I think that is really important in today's age of virality. People care more about moments than the game.
That's true. I think what we can take from that is being agile really works, doesn't it? I think if a brand is prepared to kind of sit back, wait, see what happens naturally in the game, and look at what's going on in the crowd, look at what's going on with the commentators, and then piggyback it quickly, they can often have more cut through than if they've pre-planned something months and months ahead. And then with diversity in the game, particularly in football, I think there's obviously been a huge resurgence in women's football, which is brilliant. But I think there's still a way to go. And there's obviously still brands that are not quite getting it right. We saw that with Nike and the Mary Earp shirt. And, what's your take on that? Because some brands, I think, are really starting to want to get involved in women's football. They can see the trajectory, they can see the way it's going, but they're still getting it wrong when they try and do that.
Yeah, and I think it's all to do with the authenticity and not trying to push it too hard. I think that you've got to let this thing happen. I think the women's game is growing, and it's growing in its own way. Let's stop thinking that this is a replica of the men's game. It's not. If you look at the people who go and sell out huge stadiums to watch the women's game, it doesn't look like the people who watch the men's game, right? It's a real carnival atmosphere. Yeah. The style of football is different too. And I just think that it's reading the room is really important to getting the message right when brands associate themselves with the game, right? And the game will achieve wonderful things. Don't need to worry about that. Paddy Power is a brilliant example of this. Paddy Power takes a piss out of everything, but it really nailed its mass to the LGBT cause. Rainbow laces. It sent a double-decker bus down the Brighton parade with no one on it to highlight how few professional footballers have come out as gay. They do it with meaning. It means something. They're passionate about it. They dedicate time to it. They actually do stuff. They go into the community. If you're going to do it. Because it's almost like have a little bit of respect for the people who will be reading this, so the readers, and have a bit of respect for your consumers too.
Because readers can just see straight through it, can't they, if it's just a sponsorship for sponsorship's sake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when thinking about talent and sports personalities, who's on your hit list? Who would be your dream interview if you had the opportunity to chat to anyone? Well,
I've got to say that the ones that work really well for us are the ones that you'll see on social media all the time, really. It's the real personalities. It's Tyson Fury's.
Yeah.
We'll be interviewing Conor McGregor next week. I think Gary Neville's got some good things to say. I mean, he's got too much to say sometimes, but he's great. And we love characters like Gary Lineker as well. They just seem to say really informed and really thought out things. But then you've got people on the other side, like the Tyson Furys and the Conor McGregors, that people just want to watch, and we are, we'll be all over sort of like anything that's to do with them.
And then obviously we've mentioned it's a big summer of sport next year. Of all of the sporting events, what event are you most looking forward to, and what do you think the readers are going to want to hear about the most?
There'll be a tidal wave of interest in sport across the board. And we are massively here for that,
Yeah.
And obviously football will be front and centre of that. It's brilliant that the Champions League final will be in the UK. It's going to be a really big summer of sport with the Euros as well. But it's just good that sport is going to play such a prominent role in general. Mm-hmm. And the Olympics will throw up some really, really good stories around the various new sports, the various new people. It seems like there's going to be like a sort of like a fresh wave of people. And I think the message to brands, especially around the Olympics, is stay agile, because those people, there's going to be media gold dust in there, and we'll be listening out for that. And if the brands do our job for us, then, the synergy's already there.
And with the Olympics, there's always so many stories you don't expect, isn't there? Suddenly a gold medal skateboarder or something like that. Brands leaning towards the bigger names, the household names that people know, but actually the story often isn't around those guys. It's more about the kind of new talent that comes through. You can be much more agile and interesting with them.
Absolutely. We're the land of Eddie the Eagle,
Yeah.
So I think that always is a really big indicator to brands about what people love to read. They love to read a sort of like a absolute no one from a council estate who decided to strap some skis onto a van and compete, and I think that is true. So, but anytime we talk about things like this, there is the success element that's really important, and I think that we will celebrate success, but I guess from our perspective as a relatively small publisher compared to the BBC, it's always really important not to do what the BBC does. The BBC will have those big moments. They will have the match by match commentary. They will have the game by game. They will be on the track. They do all that, and so we leave that to them. What we want is the stories that develop around that.
Yeah.
And that's not just competing people, it's equally people in the stands. We want to be in that, we want to be with our mics in the centre of the crowd with people and looking for stories.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Thanks so much for your time. It's been really good chatting to you. It feels like what brands need to do is just be agile, piggyback those moments, get you the content as it's happening, and kind of just get involved in the moments, the real moments where kind of fans are front and centre.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's my pleasure to join you. And as an editor, I can never say it enough, but the story is everything. And a relentless focus on that will generally sort of win.
Thanks, Jack. So that concludes this episode of Passion Powered Patter. Do you agree or disagree with the points raised? Was there anything left unsaid? We'd love to know your feedback. So however you're listening or viewing, please don't hesitate to let us know your comments. Stay tuned for other episodes of Passion Powered Patter, where we'll be talking to further industry experts about how brands can connect with consumers through sport. Lastly, if you want to learn more about how your brand can connect with passions, don't hesitate to get in touch.